Dr. Kethvar adjusted their viewing screen and watched the small shuttle approach the great station. The Galactic Council's main headquarters floated in the void between star systems, a massive structure that had hosted first contact meetings for over 3,000 years. Today, it would meet its newest applicants. The Zilani scientist felt their forearms tremble slightly with excitement. As the Council's leading expert on primitive species, Kethvar had been chosen to observe and evaluate these newcomers called humans. Their home world was a small blue planet on the edge of a quiet spiral arm. Nothing special about it, really. The humans themselves seemed equally unremarkable from the initial reports. The shuttle docked with a soft bump that Kethvar felt through the station's hull. Soon the airlock opened and the human delegation stepped through. Kethvar leaned forward, studying them through the security feed. They were smaller than expected. Most stood barely 2 meters tall, with soft pink or brown skin that looked like it would tear easily. No natural armor, no claws, no visible weapons. Their eyes were tiny compared to other species, and they only had 2 arms and 2 legs. How did such weak creatures even survive on their own planet? The lead human wore a simple dark outfit that covered most of her body. She had short black hair and kept looking around with those small eyes. Her movements seemed nervous but controlled. The name tag on Kethvar's screen identified her as Ambassador Sarah Chen, Earth's first representative to the galaxy. Fascinating, Kethvar whispered to themselves, making notes on their tablet. Bipedal locomotion, minimal sensory organs, no apparent defensive capabilities. The delegation was led to the Great Assembly Hall where the Council's major species waited. Kethvar followed, taking their assigned seat in the observer section. The hall was enormous, designed to accommodate the many different forms of galactic life. The Krex delegation filled one whole section with their massive warrior frames. Each stood 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor plating that could stop most weapons. Their leader, General Thok, had fought in 40 different campaigns and bore the scars to prove it. Across from them, the Vorthak hive cluster pulsed with shared thoughts. Thousands of individual minds connected as one. They could process information faster than any computer. Their pale, insect-like bodies moved in perfect unison as they turned to observe the humans. The luminal representatives floated near the ceiling, beings of pure energy contained in crystal shells. They had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago and saw material creatures as quaint relics of a primitive past. And then there were Kethvar's own people, the Zilani. Tall, graceful, with 4 arms and large eyes that could see across multiple light spectrums. They had mastered science and art while most species were still discovering fire. They prided themselves on wisdom and peaceful advancement. Ambassador Chen stepped forward to the speaking platform. The hall fell silent, though Kethvar could sense the amusement radiating from the other delegates. These humans looked so out of place among the galaxy's great powers. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system. We come before you as representatives of humanity and the planet Earth. We seek membership in this great alliance of worlds. General Thok's laugh rumbled like an earthquake. Little soft skin thinks she belongs among warriors, he growled in the trade language. Several other delegates chuckled. Chen continued as if she hadn't heard. We offer our knowledge, our friendship, and our commitment to the Council's goals of peace and cooperation. What knowledge could your primitive species possibly offer? Asked Speaker Zix of the Vorthak Collective, their voice coming from 100 mouths at once. Your people have barely left their own star system. We offer the knowledge of different perspectives, Chen replied calmly. Sometimes an outside view can solve problems that have persisted for generations. Kethvar found themselves impressed by the humans' composure. Most primitive species became angry or frightened when challenged by the Council's major powers. This Chen creature remained steady, almost serene. The formal presentations began. Each species had sent examples of their greatest achievements. The Krex displayed weapons that could crack planets. The Vorthak demonstrated computational abilities that solved complex equations in microseconds. The Luminals showed art that existed across dimensions. When humanity's turn came, Chen activated a small device. Holographic images filled the air above the platform, They showed Earth's cities, its art, its music. The images were beautiful in their own way, but primitive compared to what the Council had already seen. "This is what we offer," Chen said. "Not the strongest weapons or the fastest computers, but something different. We call it the human perspective." The images changed to show humans working together, helping each other, exploring dangerous places not for conquest, but for knowledge. They showed humans caring for other species on their planet, protecting them from extinction. "Touching," said Luminal Prime, their crystalline form pulsing with what might have been laughter. But sentiment does not qualify a species for council membership. Council leader Vextai, an ancient being whose species had founded the Alliance, raised one massive hand for silence. The leader's form was mostly hidden in flowing robes, but everyone knew they were old beyond measure and wise beyond calculation. "The evaluation period will be standard," Vextai announced, their voice echoing through the hall. "The human delegation will be granted observer status for one galactic cycle. They may establish one embassy vessel in neutral space. At the end of this period, we will vote on full membership." Chen bowed deeply. "We are honored by your consideration." As the formal session ended, Kethavar approached the human delegation. It was part of their job to interact with potential new members, to understand their culture and capabilities. "Ambassador Chen," Kethavar said, extending two of their forehands in the traditional Zalani greeting. "I am Dr. Kethavar, xenobiologist and cultural liaison. I will be working with your people during the evaluation period." Chen took both hands and shook them gently. The gesture felt strange but oddly warm. "It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Kethavar. We look forward to learning from your people." "As do we," Kethavar replied, though they wondered what these simple creatures could possibly teach the advanced Zalani. Over the following days, Kethavar reviewed humanity's files in detail. The information was surprisingly sparse. Earth's history showed the usual pattern of primitive development: wars, conflicts, gradual technological advancement. What struck Kethavar as odd was how much of the military data was missing or marked as classified. Most species applying for council membership provided complete records of their conflicts. It helped the council understand their capabilities and temperament. But the human files contained only basic information about something called defensive actions and territorial disputes. When Kethavar asked Chen about this, the human smiled in that strange way her species did, showing small white teeth. "We prefer to focus on our peaceful achievements," Chen said. "Our military history is complicated. Many of our people would rather not dwell on past conflicts." Kethavar found this refreshing. Most warrior species couldn't stop talking about their victories. Perhaps these humans truly were as peaceful as they seemed. The embassy ship arrived a week later. It was called the Harmony, and it looked exactly like what Kethavar expected from a peaceful species. The design was clean and simple, with large windows and graceful curves. No visible weapons, no armor plating, no threatening angles. As Kethavar prepared to join the human mission, they felt optimistic about the coming evaluation period. These humans seemed genuinely kind and peaceful. It would be pleasant to study a species that valued cooperation over conquest. They had no idea how wrong they were about humanity's true nature. 3 months aboard the human embassy ship had changed Kethavar's understanding of these strange creatures. The Harmony wasn't just a diplomatic vessel. It was a floating community. Human families lived in comfortable quarters, their children playing in corridors that echoed with laughter. Scientists worked in laboratories filled with curious experiments. Artists painted and sculpted in workshops that smelled of creative chaos. Kethavar had expected a sterile military environment like most species maintained. Instead, they found something unprecedented, a space vessel that felt alive with civilian life. The humans had brought their culture with them to the stars. "Dr. Kethavar, would you like to join us for dinner?" asked Maria Santos, one of the ship's botanists. She was a small woman with kind eyes who had been teaching Kethavar about human food cultivation. "I would be honored," Kethavar replied, still struggling with some human social customs, but enjoying the warmth these beings showed. The dining hall buzzed with conversation in dozens of human languages. Children ran between tables while adults discussed everything from poetry to plasma physics. Kethvar noticed how the humans included everyone in their social groups, even their alien observer. They had a word for it: family. Not blood family, but chosen family. Captain James Morrison, the ship's commander, approached their table. He was a large man with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen much of the galaxy, but his eyes held the same kindness Kethvar had observed in most humans. "Doctor, we've received some troubling news from the council chambers," Morrison said, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. "There's been an attack on the Minoran colonies." Kethvar's forearms went still. The Minorans were a peaceful species, much like the Zilani, but even more advanced in their pacifist philosophy. They had been council members for over 2,000 years. "Who would attack the Minorans?" Kethvar asked. "They have no enemies, no resources worth stealing." Morrison's expression darkened. "The Kalani hegemony. They've claimed the Minoran systems contain strategic minerals essential for their expansion. The Kalani." Even peaceful Kethvar knew that name with a chill. The hegemony was a brutal empire that conquered weaker species for slaves and resources. They had been quiet for decades, contained by council treaties and the threat of intervention by stronger members. "But the council will stop them," Kethvar said with certainty. "The Krex warriors, the luminol energy beings, surely they won't allow this aggression." Morrison exchanged a glance with Maria that Kethvar didn't understand. "The council is debating the appropriate response. It's complicated when dealing with a species as militarily powerful as the Kalani." Over the following days, reports from the Minoran systems grew worse. 3 colonies had fallen completely. The Kalani weren't just conquering, they were systematically enslaving or eliminating the population. Refugee ships fled into council space carrying survivors with haunted eyes and stories of unimaginable cruelty. Kethvar spent hours in the Harmony's communication center, listening to council debates broadcast on public channels. The discussions were maddening in their academic nature. General Thok argued for a limited military response to test Kalani resolve. The Vorthak Collective ran probability calculations on various intervention scenarios. The Luminals suggested negotiating for Minoran evacuation rights. Everyone talked while beings died. "Why don't they just stop the Kalani?" Kethvar asked Ambassador Chen during one of their regular cultural exchange sessions. Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the stars. "Sometimes," she said finally, "the powerful prefer to debate rather than act. It lets them feel wise while avoiding the costs of doing what's right. But surely the council has the strength to stop this aggression." "Oh, they have the strength," Chen agreed. "The question is whether they have the will." That afternoon, Chen requested a private meeting with the council leadership. Kethvar accompanied her as cultural liaison, curious to see how their peaceful human would address this crisis. The meeting took place via subspace communication in the Harmony's main conference room. The images of council leaders filled the large screen: Vextai's robed figure, General Thok's scarred face, Speaker Zix's collective swarm, and others. "Ambassador Chen?" Vextai spoke with the weariness of ages. "I assume you wish to discuss the Minoran situation." "I do, honored leaders. Humanity formally requests permission to provide humanitarian aid to Minoran refugees." General Thok's laugh was harsh. "Softskins want to play rescue? You'd only get in the way of real solutions." "With respect, General, what real solutions? It's been 6 days since the attacks began. How many more will die while the council debates?" "The situation is complex," Speaker Zix buzzed. "Kalani military strength exceeds most individual council members. A coordinated response requires careful planning." Chen's expression remained perfectly calm, but Kethvar noticed something new in her eyes, something cold. "How long do your careful plans typically take?" "These matters cannot be rushed," Vextai replied. "Hasty action could escalate the conflict beyond control." "I see. And while you plan, the Kalani continue their operations?" "Regrettably, yes." Chen nodded slowly. "Then humanity requests permission to evacuate civilian refugees from the conflict zone. Purely humanitarian in nature." The council leaders exchanged glances across the transmission. Finally, Vextai spoke. "That seems acceptable. Your people may proceed with refugee operations. However, you are not to engage Kalani forces under any circumstances. Your ships are not equipped for military action." "Understood completely," Chen replied with that same strange smile that never quite reached her eyes. We wouldn't dream of engaging in military action. After the communication ended, Kethvar felt confused by the exchange. Something about Chen's responses felt oddly scripted, as if she had expected exactly those answers. Ambassador, are you truly planning a humanitarian mission? Chen looked at them with an expression Kethvar couldn't read. Doctor, how long have you known humans? 3 months now. In that time, what have you learned about us? Kethvar considered the question. That you are kind, curious, and peaceful. You care for others, even strangers. You create beauty and seek knowledge for its own sake. And do you think beings like that would stand by while innocents are slaughtered? No, but the Council forbade military action. They forbade us from engaging Kalani forces. They said nothing about engaging forces that happened to be attacking Kalani ships. Kethvar stared at their human friend. There was something different about Chen now, something calculating behind her peaceful exterior. That evening, unusual activity began throughout the Harmony. Engineers worked late shifts on what they called system modifications. Families started moving to interior sections of the ship for safety during the humanitarian mission. The artists and scientists seemed to disappear entirely, replaced by people Kethvar didn't recognize wearing different clothes and moving with military precision. When Kethvar asked about these changes, a cheerful engineer named Rodriguez explained they were retrofitting some systems for the rescue operation. What kind of systems require retrofitting for refugee transport? Kethvar asked. Rodriguez smiled that peculiar human smile. Oh, you know. Communication arrays, sensor packages, navigation computers. Boring technical stuff. But Kethvar noticed the engineer's hands were stained with what looked like weapon lubricants, and the corridors now smelled faintly of machinery they couldn't identify. Late that night, unable to sleep, Kethvar wandered the ship's corridors. They found themselves in a section they'd never visited before, following the sound of voices to a room marked Storage Bay 7. Through a partially open door, they saw Ambassador Chen standing before a large group of humans. But these weren't the peaceful families and scientists Kethvar knew. These people wore matching dark uniforms and listened with the focused attention of soldiers receiving orders. The Kalani have superior numbers and firepower, Chen was saying, her voice carrying an authority Kethvar had never heard before. But they've made the mistake of treating this as a simple conquest. They don't understand what they're really facing. One of the uniformed humans asked, What about the council observers? Chen's eyes found Kethvar through the gap in the door. For a moment, their gazes met across the room. Dr. Kethvar has been an honored guest aboard our ship, Chen said clearly. They will continue to be treated with all the respect and protection that status requires. Kethvar stepped back from the door, their mind racing. Everything they thought they knew about humans was crumbling. These weren't the peaceful, primitive beings they'd been studying. These were something else entirely. As they hurried back to their quarters, one thought echoed in Kethvar's mind. What exactly had the Council just given permission to enter the war zone? The transformation began as they approached the war zone. Kethvar watched in growing amazement as the Harmony shed its peaceful disguise like a snake shedding old skin. Panels along the hull slid away to reveal weapon ports that definitely hadn't been there before. The gentle curves of the ship's exterior rearranged themselves into angles designed for deflecting enemy fire. What Kethvar had thought were decorative elements were actually retractable armor plating. In the corridors, the change was even more dramatic. The warm lighting switched to a harsh red glow. Walls that had displayed art and family photos now showed tactical displays and weapon status indicators. The dining halls converted into command centers filled with screens showing enemy positions and battle calculations. The families were gone. The children, the elderly, the artists and poets, all evacuated to hidden sections of the ship or transferred to other vessels entirely. In their place stood soldiers, technicians, and officers moving with the precision of a military machine. Ambassador Chen appeared on the bridge wearing a uniform Kethvar had never seen before. Black fabric covered with insignia and rank markers from a dozen different human organizations. Her peaceful diplomat smile was gone, replaced by the focused expression of someone preparing for war. Dr. Kethvar, she said, noticing their confusion. I apologize for the deception. We felt it was necessary. Who are you? Kethvar whispered, staring at this stranger wearing their friend's face. Colonel Sarah Chen. Human Defense Force Special Operations. I've been a soldier for 15 years, a diplomat for 3 months. But the families, the children, were never in danger. Military personnel and their families serving under deep cover. The artists were intelligence officers. The scientists were weapons specialists. Everyone on this ship is military, Doctor. Everyone except you. Kethvar felt their legs go weak. They gripped a nearby console for support. The Council. The Council believes humans are peaceful primitives. Yes, they do. We worked very hard to give that impression. Why? Chen studied the tactical displays before answering. Because sometimes the best way to keep peace is to let others underestimate your ability to wage war. The galaxy has been stable for a long time, Doctor. Perhaps too stable. Powers like the Kalani have grown bold because they believe the Council has grown soft. On the main screen, sensor readings showed the Minoran system ahead. Dozens of Kalani warships moved in formation around the surviving colonies. Their vessels were massive, bristling with weapons and armor plating that could withstand most Council firepower. How many ships do you have? Kethvar asked, trying to understand how one human vessel could make any difference. Chen smiled, and this time it was a predator's smile. Computer, decloak the fleet. The space around them shimmered like heat waves, and suddenly the harmony wasn't alone. Dozens of human ships materialized from apparent nothingness, their stealth systems deactivating in perfect synchronization. Some were as large as Council dreadnoughts, others small and swift like hunting birds. Kethvar's forearms trembled as they realized the implications. How long have you been preparing for this? Humans have been watching the galaxy for 50 years, Doctor. Long before we made official contact. We knew about the Council, the major powers, the threats like the Kalani. We've been planning for this day since we first left our home system. But the Council's sensors are designed to detect the energy signatures and materials used by known galactic powers. Human technology developed along different paths. We use different metals, different energy sources, different principles. To your sensors, we're practically invisible when we choose to be. The fleet moved toward the Kalani forces with coordinated precision. Kethvar watched the tactical displays, expecting to see the kind of brutal frontal assault most species favored. The Kreks would charge directly at the enemy. The Luminals would attempt to overwhelm with pure energy. Even peaceful species like the Zelani would focus on destroying enemy ships as quickly as possible. The humans did something entirely different. Phase 1. Execute, Chen ordered. The human ships spread out in a complex pattern that made no sense to Kethvar. Instead of attacking the Kalani directly, they began targeting what appeared to be empty space around the enemy fleet. What are they shooting at? Kethvar asked. Communication relays, explained the human tactical officer, a woman named Lieutenant Park. The Kalani use a network of hidden satellites to coordinate their fleet movements. We've been mapping their positions for weeks. As the invisible satellites died one by one, chaos began to spread through the Kalani formation. Ship captains found themselves cut off from their command structure, unable to coordinate with neighboring vessels. Phase 2, Chen announced. Now the human ships targeted what looked like even more empty space. This time they were destroying supply depot coordinates and fuel cache locations. The Kalani had spread these resources throughout the system to support their invasion, but the humans had been watching and learning. Kethvar began to understand. This wasn't a battle, it was surgery. The humans weren't trying to destroy the Kalani fleet through brute force. They were systematically cutting apart the enemy's ability to function as an organized military force. But how did you know where all these targets were? Kethvar asked. Chen gestured to the display showing Earth's initial diplomatic mission months ago. Do you remember when we submitted our cultural and technological databases to the Council for review? Yes, of course. Standard procedure for new applicants. Those databases included our entertainment media, movies, books, games, art. The Council barely glanced at them, but the Kalani intelligence services downloaded everything. Kethvar stared at her. You let them steal your information? We gave them exactly the information we wanted them to have. Human war stories, tactical manuals disguised as fiction, strategic concepts embedded in games and movies. For months, the Kalani have been studying human military doctrine. But why would you want them to understand your tactics? Chen's smile grew wider. Because everything we showed them was wrong. Obsolete strategies from centuries ago. Fictional scenarios designed to make us look primitive and predictable. While they prepared for the war they thought humans would fight. We prepared for the war we actually intended to fight. The Kalani fleet was starting to panic, cut off from command and control, low on supplies. Individual ships began making desperate attempts to break free from the human formation surrounding them, but every move they made seemed to be anticipated. Phase 3, Chen ordered. This time the human ships did engage directly, but not in any way Kethvar expected. Instead of trying to destroy the Kalani vessels, they targeted specific systems with surgical precision. Engine manifolds were disabled, weapon arrays were carefully destroyed, life support systems were left intact. You're not trying to kill them, Kethvar realized. Killing is wasteful, Chen replied. A dead enemy teaches you nothing. A defeated enemy teaches you everything. As the battle progressed, Kethvar began to see the full scope of human planning. This wasn't just a rescue mission or even a military operation. It was a demonstration. Every move was calculated not just for tactical effect, but for the lesson it would teach. The humans were showing the galaxy what they were capable of while still maintaining the illusion of restraint. They could have destroyed the entire Kalani fleet in the opening minutes, but instead they chose to dismantle it piece by piece, preserving lives while making their point unmistakably clear. Dr. Kethvar, Chen said as the last Kalani ship surrendered, I hope you understand why this deception was necessary. Kethvar looked at the tactical display showing human ships moving to rescue survivors and provide medical aid to wounded Kalani soldiers. The same beings who had just demolished a superior enemy force were now treating their prisoners with careful medical attention. I'm beginning to understand many things, Kethvar replied quietly. But I'm not sure I understand humans at all, Chen nodded. That's probably for the best, Doctor. The galaxy is safer when we remain a mystery. As rescue operations began for the Minoran colonies, Kethvar realized that everything they thought they knew about galactic power structures had just changed forever. The humans hadn't just won a battle, they had announced their presence on the galactic stage in a way that could never be ignored or forgotten, and the most terrifying part was that Kethvar suspected this was still just a small demonstration of what humanity was truly capable of. The real horror began after the battle ended. Kethvar had expected humans to celebrate their victory, to boast about their superior tactics and technology. Instead, they went to work with the methodical efficiency of beings who had done this many times before. The Harmony's medical bay filled with wounded Kalani soldiers, receiving the same care as human casualties. The ship's engineers worked alongside Kalani technicians to repair damaged life support systems on the surrendered vessels. Human supply ships delivered food and medical supplies to both sides equally. I don't understand, Kethvar said to Colonel Chen as they watched the relief operations. These are your enemies. They came here to commit genocide. Chen stood at the observation window, still wearing her military uniform but with the Predator's intensity replaced by something that might have been sadness. They're soldiers following orders, Doctor. Most of them probably never questioned whether this invasion was right or wrong. They're not our enemies. They're victims of the same system we're trying to change. Through the window, Kethvar could see human medics working to save the life of a Kalani warrior who had been critically injured when his ship's weapon systems overloaded. The humans worked with the same dedication they would show for their own wounded, but surely some of them deserve punishment for their crimes. The ones who gave the orders, yes. The ones who committed atrocities against civilians, absolutely. But the average soldier? They'll face trial according to galactic law, receive fair representation, and serve appropriate sentences. Many will probably be offered the chance to return home with a new understanding of what war actually costs. Kethvar found this approach more disturbing than simple vengeance would have been. There was something deeply unsettling about beings who could wage war with such devastating effectiveness while maintaining such careful moral restraint. Over the following days, as the liberation of the Minoran colonies continued, Kethvar began to understand the true scope of human planning. This operation hadn't been improvised in response to the Kalani invasion. It had been prepared for years, waiting for the right moment. Lieutenant Park showed Kethvar the intelligence files the humans had compiled on every major galactic power. The documents were terrifyingly comprehensive, detailing military capabilities, political structures, economic weaknesses, and cultural blind spots with surgical precision. We've been studying the galaxy since we first detected your radio transmissions, Park explained. Every species, every alliance, every potential threat or ally. We know more about most council members than they know about themselves. How is that possible? Because we're new. We don't carry the baggage of ancient grudges or traditional thinking. We see patterns that have become invisible to species who've been part of the system for millennia. The files on the Kalani alone filled dozens of volumes. Human agents had infiltrated their society, studied their military doctrine, mapped their supply lines, and identified key vulnerabilities that could be exploited without massive loss of life. You've been planning to fight them for decades? We've been planning to stop them, Park corrected. The Kalani have been expanding aggressively for centuries, but the Council always found reasons not to intervene decisively. Too complicated, too risky, too expensive. Eventually, they would have grown strong enough to threaten even the major powers. Kethvar reviewed the strategic assessments with growing unease. The humans hadn't just predicted the Kalani would attack the Minerans, they had identified it as the most likely scenario to force Council action. The peaceful, defenseless Minerans were exactly the kind of target that would create a crisis too obvious to ignore. Did you know this would happen? We knew something like this would happen eventually. The Kalani needed to expand to sustain their economy. The Mineran systems were the most logical next target. We prepared for multiple scenarios. And if the Council had acted quickly to stop the invasion? Park shrugged. Then we would have provided support as requested and remained in the background. The goal was always to protect innocent lives, not to demonstrate human capabilities. But you must have known the Council would hesitate. We hoped they would act decisively, but we prepared for the more likely reality. This casual admission chilled Kethvar more than any display of military might. The humans had correctly predicted the behavior of ancient, sophisticated civilizations with unsettling accuracy. They understood galactic politics better than species who had been practicing it for thousands of years. The intelligence files revealed another disturbing truth. Humans had been manipulating galactic events for decades before making official contact. Trade disruptions that prevented conflicts, mysterious accidents that removed aggressive leaders, information leaks that exposed corruption, all carefully orchestrated to nudge the galaxy toward stability. You've been controlling us, Kethvar whispered. Guiding. Chen corrected gently. The galaxy was heading toward a major war. The Kalani, the hegemony expansion, resource conflicts, the breakdown of Council authority, all building toward something that would have consumed billions of lives. We helped steer events toward better outcomes. Without our knowledge or consent, would you have preferred the alternative? Kethvar had no answer for that. The projections in the human files were terrifyingly plausible. Left to their own devices, the galaxy's great powers would likely have stumbled into a devastating conflict within the next few decades. But what disturbed Kethvar most was how the humans had maintained their peaceful facade throughout this manipulation. Even now, as they demonstrated overwhelming military superiority, they continued to present themselves as reluctant warriors forced into action by circumstances. Are you actually peaceful? Kethvar asked Chen during one of their evening conversations. Chen considered the question carefully. We prefer peace, yes, but we're not pacifists. We learned long ago that sometimes violence is necessary to prevent greater violence. The question isn't whether to use force, but when and how much. And you trust yourselves to make those decisions. We don't trust anyone to make those decisions. That's why we built systems to check our own power, to question our own motives, to limit our own authority. Human military doctrine requires multiple independent confirmations before any major action. We assume we'll make mistakes and plan accordingly. This revelation was perhaps the most terrifying of all. Most species assumed their own righteousness, trusted their own judgment, believed in their own moral superiority. The humans had built their entire military philosophy around the assumption that they would be wrong. As the Mineran evacuation neared completion, Kethvar realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A new power had announced itself not through conquest or intimidation, but through a carefully orchestrated demonstration of restrained capability. The humans could have conquered the Kalani territory. They could have dictated terms to the Council. They could have revealed the full scope of their intelligence network and demanded recognition as the galaxy's dominant power. Instead, they quietly cleaned up the mess, cared for the wounded, and prepared to fade back into apparent insignificance. The message was clear to anyone with the wisdom to understand it. Humans could do anything they wanted in the galaxy, but they chose to do only what was necessary. What happens now? Cathvar asked as they watched the last Kalani prisoners being transferred to council custody. Now we go back to being peaceful diplomats seeking council membership, Chen replied. We submit our reports, attend our meetings, and continue learning about our new galactic neighbors. And the council? Surely they'll realize what you're capable of. Chen's smile was enigmatic. The council will see exactly what they're prepared to see. Some will understand. Others will convince themselves this was a lucky accident or an anomaly. Most will choose to believe what's most comfortable. And if they reject human membership, then we'll continue our work from outside the official structure. The galaxy's stability is more important than our diplomatic status. As they returned to human space, Kethavar understood that they had witnessed the emergence of a new type of galactic power. Not conquerors or traitors or prophets, but guardians who hid their strength behind masks of weakness, and their wisdom behind pretenses of ignorance. The most terrifying realization was that this entire demonstration might have been intended as much for Kethvar as for the Kalani. The humans had wanted at least one council observer to understand their true nature, to carry that knowledge back to the galactic community. They wanted the galaxy to know that humanity was watching, whether they were officially invited to participate or not. The great assembly hall of the Galactic Council had never felt so small to Kethvar. They stood at the observer's podium, forearms trembling slightly as they prepared to deliver their evaluation of humanity. Around them, the representatives of the galaxy's great powers waited with expressions ranging from casual interest to barely concealed amusement. General Thok lounged in his massive chair, convinced that the primitive humans had somehow stumbled into a lucky victory against an equally primitive enemy. Speaker Zix's collective hummed with calculations that dismissed human capabilities as statistical anomalies. The luminals pulsed with the serene confidence of beings who had transcended physical concerns millennia ago. Only Council Leader Vextai seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Their ancient eyes focused intently on Kethvar from within their concealing robes. Dr. Kethvar, Vextai spoke with the formal cadence of official proceedings. You have observed humanity for 6 months, including their recent intervention in the Minoran crisis. Present your evaluation for the Council's consideration. Kethavar had spent weeks preparing this moment, crafting careful words that might help the Council understand what they were truly facing. Now, looking out at the assembled representatives, they realized that most would not want to understand. Honored Council members, Kethvar began, their voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. I have indeed observed humanity extensively. What I discovered challenges our fundamental assumptions about galactic civilization. A few representatives shifted in their seats, but most maintained expressions of polite boredom. They expected the usual evaluation, primitive but promising, requiring guidance and development before full membership could be considered. Humans present themselves as peaceful, curious beings seeking knowledge and friendship. This presentation is not false. They genuinely value peace and learning. However, it is incomplete. General Thok's laugh rumbled through the hall. Let me guess, little Zelani. The soft skins have hidden depths, secret wisdom that surpasses our ancient knowledge. No, General. They have hidden weapons that surpass our ancient armies. The laughter died. Several representatives leaned forward, suddenly paying attention. Kethvar activated their presentation display, showing tactical recordings from the Minoran operation. The human embassy ship transformed into a military command vessel within hours. Their peaceful fleet materialized from stealth systems that render them invisible to our sensors. Their primitive tactics dismantled a superior Kalani force with surgical precision. Impossible, Speaker Zix buzzed from 100 mouths. Our intelligence networks detected no human military buildup. Their technology assessments showed nothing beyond basic space travel capabilities. Because their intelligence networks are superior to ours, Kethvar replied quietly. They have been observing the galaxy for decades before making contact. They know more about us than we know about ourselves. The hall erupted in angry voices. Representatives demanded proof, accused Kethvar of exaggeration, insisted that primitive species could not possibly possess such capabilities. Through it all, Vextai remained silent, watching and listening. Kethavar waited for the noise to die down before continuing. I have documentation. Intelligence files compiled by human agents embedded throughout galactic civilization, strategic assessments of every major power, contingency plans for conflicts we haven't even imagined yet. They uploaded a small sample of the human intelligence archives, carefully selected to show scope without revealing operational details. The silence that followed was profound as council members absorbed the implications. They've been manipulating galactic events for decades, Kethvar continued, preventing conflicts, removing dangerous leaders, guiding trade policies, nudging diplomatic negotiations toward peaceful outcomes. The stability we've enjoyed recently isn't natural. It's been carefully maintained by human intervention. This is unacceptable, sputtered Ambassador Crix of the Hegemony Coalition. No species has the right to interfere in galactic affairs without consent. Yet they prevented 3 major wars and saved approximately 4 billion lives, Kethvar replied. Were they wrong to act without our permission? Or were we wrong to make such action necessary? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Most species had contributed to the instabilities humans had worked to correct. Their inaction, their politics, their ancient grudges had created the problems humans had quietly solved. But the real terror, Kethvar continued, isn't their capacity for violence or manipulation. It's their capacity for restraint. This statement puzzled many representatives. Restraint was hardly terrifying. Humans could have conquered any of our territories. They could have destroyed the colony completely. They could have revealed their intelligence networks and used their knowledge to dominate galactic politics. They chose not to. Kethvar let that sink in before delivering their final assessment. We asked ourselves whether humans deserve membership among us. The correct question is whether we deserve membership among them. They didn't just save the Minerans from the colony. They saved us from ourselves, from our complacency, our arrogance, our assumption that evolutionary advancement peaks with technological development. General Thok stood, his massive frame radiating indignation. You expect us to bow before these hidden puppeteers? To reward their deception with membership? I expect us to recognize reality, Kethvar replied. Humans are already among us, whether we acknowledge it officially or not. The question is whether we're wise enough to work with them openly, rather than forcing them to continue operating in shadows. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some representatives demanded humanity's immediate expulsion from galactic space. Others insisted on access to human technology and intelligence. A few suggested preemptive strikes against human colonies before they could grow stronger. Through it all, Vextai remained silent, occasionally asking clarifying questions but offering no opinions. Finally, as the arguments began repeating themselves, the ancient leader called for order. The council will vote, Vextai announced. All in favor of granting humanity full membership status? The vote was closer than Kethvar had expected, but the result was unanimous. Even the most resistant representatives ultimately chose pragmatism over pride. By unanimous consent, humanity is granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. As the formal session ended, Vextai approached Kethvar's platform. Up close, the ancient being's eyes held a wisdom that transcended species boundaries. An interesting evaluation, Dr. Kethvar. Tell me, did the humans know what you would report to us? Kethvar considered the question carefully. I believe they hoped I would understand the truth and share it appropriately, but they never attempted to influence my conclusions. And what is your personal opinion of humanity's intentions? They want what we all claim to want. A peaceful, stable galaxy where different species can coexist and thrive. The difference is that they're willing to work for it instead of just talking about it. Vextai nodded slowly. And the fact that they could destroy us all if they chose makes their choice not to all the more significant. After the council session, Kethvar returned to their private quarters to compile their final report. They had told the council the truth, but not all of it. Some revelations were too dangerous to share publicly. In their personal files, Kethvar recorded their deepest observation. Humans didn't just possess superior military technology and intelligence capabilities. They possessed something far more dangerous. The moral authority that came from consistently choosing to do what was right rather than what was easy. They had entered the galactic stage not as conquerors seeking dominion, but as guardians seeking to preserve something precious. They understood that true power lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary, and when it wasn't. The galaxy had gained more than a new council member. It had gained something it had never possessed before. A species that could rule everything but chose instead to protect everyone. Kethvar's final log entry read, "Today I learned that the most dangerous human isn't the one who shows you their weapons. It's the one who shows you their mercy and makes you wonder what you've done to deserve it." As they sealed the report, Kethvar realized they had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Not the rise of a new empire or the triumph of superior technology, but the emergence of a species that might actually be worthy of the power they wielded. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it was the most terrifying revelation of all, because it meant the galaxy now had to live up to humanity's example, and Kethvar wasn't sure they were capable of such evolution. Outside their window, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that the balance of galactic civilization had shifted forever. Somewhere among those stars, humans were quietly standing guard, watching and waiting to ensure that the galaxy remained worthy of protection. For the first time in their long life, Kethvar felt truly safe, and that safety was more frightening than any threat they had ever faced.